Good morning. I'm Carol Krieger, and on behalf of the Brentwood Historic Commission, I'd like to welcome you to Prim Historic Park and the Boiling Spring Academy. If it was the year 950, we would be standing right in the middle of Mississippian-era man builders' village. There was a big, huge fort-like fence that went all the way around the village called a palisade. The villagers lived inside the fort-like fence. Originally, there were 5 mounds on this site. Now, because of erosion and time, there are only 4 visible mounds. If you'll look out in the field behind you, you will see mound number 2, 3, and 4. When we walk through the opening in the fence, you're going to see what is left of mound number 1, which was the chief's mound. Now, several years ago, in a site that's just across the hill down Moore's Lane, there was a Paleo Indian site, and mastodon bones were uncovered. And because there were markings on the bones of the mastodon, they knew that it had been hunted by the Native Americans that lived here. This was an agricultural society, meaning that they planted everything that they needed to eat. They planted beans, corns, and squash. They hunted with bows and arrows, originally with spears, and then they went to bows and arrows. And they hunted things like deer and wild turkey, which we still see around here now. The chief lived on the top of Mound 1 so that he could see what was happening, everything that was going on in his village. Let's talk about the reasons why the Native Americans would have picked this area to live. The soil was very fertile, so they could grow their crops. The weather's good most of the time, and there's a ready source of water in the Little Harpeth River, which is on the other side of the academy, and we'll see it a little later. They could grow their crops here. They could use the water for drinking, for watering their crops, for bathing. It was also a source of transportation for them. There were several other villages in this area, and they could go down to the river, get in their canoes, go up the river or down the river and trade with those people. As I said, they lived here until about 1450, and then they just left. We don't know why, but we do know when the school was being restored, that MTSU found burned post holes where they had burned their huts when they left. Some of the reasons they may have left this area is there could have been a war with another tribe. Lots of people were killed, burned the village, left. Another reason is there could have been disease that came into their village and killed a lot of people. Another reason is there could have been a drought. Do you know what a drought is? That means if it doesn't rain, there's no water. The river dries up, they have to move on. They lived here until about 1450, they left, and they never came back to this area. Now I'd like to show you an artifact that was found in this area. These are over 1,000 years old, and they're earplugs or earrings that the Native Americans would have worn in their ears in a huge hole in their earlobe. Now these are thousands of years old, but do you recognize earplugs like this in anybody now that's in the year 2020 with a big hole in their ear and an earplug like this in their ear? Now we're going to move ahead to the 1500s. European explorers were coming into the area like Hernando de Soto. They brought things the Native Americans had never seen before, like horses and dogs, and they traded goods with them they were not familiar with. That was the good news. The bad news is they brought diseases that the Native Americans had no immunity to, like smallpox and measles. And because of that, the Native American numbers decreased tremendously. Now we're moving ahead to the 1700s. At this time, the Cherokee tribes are living in eastern Tennessee, and the Chickasaw tribes are living in western Tennessee, and they're both using Middle Tennessee as hunting grounds. So because there's so much to hunt, now settlers and long hunters start moving into the area. One of the most famous ones is Daniel Boone. He came across the Cumberland Gap, across the Wilderness Road. It was very treacherous. They all came here for the same reason that the Native Americans lived here. Soil was fertile, there was lots of hunting, they could trade with the Native Americans. They were called long hunters because they carried rifles with very long barrels on them and because they were gone from home for long periods of time. While they were gone, it was necessary for their wives and children to take care of their property back where they lived. The Long Hunters came to this region for the same reason that the Native Americans did. The soil was good, the weather was good most of the time. They could trade with the Native Americans for things that neither one of them had seen before. The Long Hunters could trade for furs, bear skins, things like that, and the Native Americans could get gunpowder and things they had never seen before. Another famous Long Hunter was William Bean. He came from Virginia with his family. They settled here in what is now Johnson City, Tennessee. Due to increased population, conflicts with the settlers, their loss of land, lots of settlers moving here, by 1836 the Native Americans had given up all of their land in the Tennessee area. Now we're going to move ahead to the 1800s. This community is growing. Lots of people are living here now. So in 1832, it's decided that a school needs to be built in the area. So in 1833, Boiling Spring Academy opened for the sons of the wealthy landowners in the area. At that time, girls, poor young men, and enslaved children could not attend school. It was a private school, and some children came, or some young men rather, came and boarded in the area to go to school here. It continued as a school until the late 1800s. At that time, they needed a meeting place and a church, so they decided to take the front door from the side of the building and move it into the front to make it look more like a church. In the late 1800s, it did become a Williamson County school and continued until the early 1900s. In 1927, the Prim family across the street bought this property, and the school became a storage barn for them. In 2003, the property was donated by the Prim family once again to the City of Brentwood to become a city park. In 2005, we opened with our first field trips for elementary school students. And so we like to say that the building has gone full circle. It started out as a school, it became a church and a meeting place, and it became a school again. And now it's a place for you to look, listen, and learn about the history of the area.